Today we're going to sew the Tapioca Trousers, which are the trousers of my dreams. I will have the pattern linked down below. It comes in sizes 0 to 34 and I will be making a size 8. There's a few items that you'll need to gather before we get started. Some of them are optional and some of them are not. The first is of course the fabric that you're going to be using. I chose this really nice cobalt lightweight suiting and I'm very excited to work with it. These trousers are super versatile, so you could pick something that's lightweight or you could pick something that's heavyweight, and either way it's going to come out great. I've previously made them in a lightweight twill and that came out amazing. I've also made them in a heavyweight denim-like fabric and they're so luxurious. I really love the drape of the heavyweight fabric, so I'd highly recommend it if that's something that you're interested in. Next up, we're going to need a mid-weight fusible interfacing. My favorite one is from Pilon and I'll have it linked down below for your reference. Next up, you're going to need a zipper. The length that you choose is going to be dependent on the size of the trousers that you're making. It's either going to be a zipper that's 7 inches or 8 inches. Next up, you're going to need thread. I personally recommend matching the color of your thread to the color of your fabric. The only place that your stitching is going to be visible is going to be at the hem as well as at the crotch area for the fly. Now there's also 4 different options for doing the closure at the waistband. The one that I personally recommend involves a button as well as a hook and eye clasp. Now the last thing that you're going to need that's optional is a fabric for the pocket bags. The reason you might want to use a different fabric for the pocket bags than you would for the rest of your garment is because if you choose a heavyweight fabric, you're not going to want the pockets to be made out of that heavyweight material. You'll want something that's a lot more lightweight, like a cotton, for example. Even though I'm using a lightweight fabric to create these trousers today, for the purposes of this tutorial, I am going to use a separate pocket bag fabric so that you can see how to construct the pocket facings if you're planning to use a heavyweight fabric. Now, without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. We're going to start by cutting out all of our pattern pieces. Make sure that you've washed and dried your fabric so that you don't accidentally shrink your trousers after making them. The amount of fabric that you need will be dependent on the size that you're making and the width of your fabric. All that information is in the instructions, so you'll know exactly how much fabric you need to purchase. When cutting out your pieces, make sure to transfer all the pattern markings, such as the placement of the pleats, the darts, and all of the notches. If you're using a lightweight material, you can cut the pocket bags out of your trouser fabric and you won't need to worry about the pocket facing pieces. However, if your material is more heavyweight, cut your pocket bags out of a separate lightweight fabric and cut both of the facing pieces out of your trouser fabric. After all that's cut out, you'll also need to cut your fusible interfacing. When doing this, I highly recommend using the pattern pieces as your guide rather than using the fabric that you've already cut out. If you use the fabric, it may distort the shape of the pieces and cause issues during construction later on. Okay, now that all of our fabric is cut out, we're going to move on to applying the interfacing to the waistband pieces as well as both of the fly pieces. To apply the interfacing, you'll match the rough glue side of the interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric. Then you'll press on top of the interfacing for about 15 seconds. If you go too fast, the glue won't properly adhere to the fabric, so be sure to take your time with this step. Next, you'll take your fly shield and fold it in half with the right sides together. Then you'll sew the bottom edge of the fly shield with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once sewn, you're going to flip the fly shield so that the right sides are facing out and you'll press it in place. The next step is to finish the raw edges of the fly shield together and the curved edge of the fly facing. I'll be using a serging machine to finish all of the raw edges, but feel free to use a zigzag stitch if you don't own a serger. Now that your fly shield and fly facing are prepared, you can go ahead and set them aside. Next, we're going to finish the raw edges of the rise of both of the back pant pieces, as well as both of the front pant pieces. You'll notice that there's a step in the seam allowance on both of the front pant pieces. It's very important that you don't cut off the step in the seam allowance. This is what the front pant piece will look like once the edges are finished. Now you're going to take the fly facing and place it on top of the right front pant with the right sides together. Then you're going to sew them together with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, stopping a 1/2 inch above the step in the seam allowance, which is indicated by a dot on your pattern piece. Now take your work over to your ironing station and press the seam allowance towards the fly facing. Then understitch the seam allowance to the fly facing, stopping again a 1/2 inch above the step in the seam allowance. Once that's done, you can set your right front pant aside and grab both your zipper and your left front pant piece. You're going to open the zipper and place it face down, aligning it to the edge of the fabric. Then you'll pin the zipper down and sew it in place using a zipper foot. You'll want your zipper stop to be 5/8 of an inch from the top of the pant. When sewing, you're going to need to move the zipper pull out of the way. Depending on the type of zipper you're using, you may find this extremely difficult. To easily avoid the zipper pull, you can backstitch before reaching it, take your work off of your machine, move the zipper pull out of the way, and then begin your stitches again. Now you're going to take your fly shield, place it on top of the zipper, and pin it in place. Then you'll sew it down at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, being careful not to stitch through the zipper. I find that it's helpful to turn your work over and stitch directly on top of the stitches that are holding your zipper in place. Once that's done, you'll take your work over to your ironing station and iron the seam allowance towards the left front pant. There will be a small fold near the bottom of the zipper, but this will not negatively affect your construction. Some patterns recommend that you clip into the seam allowance, but I highly recommend that you don't do this because it creates a weak point in the fabric and can cause fraying with wear. Next, you're going to edge stitch the seam allowance in place. Now that the right front pant and the left front pant are fully prepared, you're going to place them on top of one another and pin the crotch curve in place. Then you'll sew the front crotch curve with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, stopping the seam in line with the step in the seam allowance. Once the front pant pieces are attached, position your work so that the zipper is between the fly shield and the fly facing. With the zipper closed, pin the zipper to the fly facing where it naturally falls when the pant fronts are directly on top of each other. You'll also want to pin the fly shield to the left front pant so that it's out of the way of the zipper. Next, you're going to sew the zipper to the fly facing. You'll notice that the top of the zipper veers to the side when the zipper is closed. That position is how you should sew it down. If you straighten it out, your zipper will likely be visible when worn. Now you're going to pin the fly facing to the right front pant, and with a contrasting thread, you'll baste the fly shield in place. This step is basically just tacking down the fly facing so that you can sew it down from the front side of the garment without it shifting underneath the machine. Once the basting stitch is in, you can remove the pins. Flip your work over and top stitch the fly facing in place. I recommend sewing slowly, especially around the curved edge. This stitching will be visible when worn, so you'll want it to be as visually clean as possible. After the top stitching is in place, you're simply going to remove the basting stitches and the remaining pins that are holding down the fly shield. At this point, your zipper should be fully functional. The last thing to do is add a small Bartack on the curved portion of the top stitching. The Bartack will pierce through the right front pant, the fly facing, and the fly shield. This will add extra strength to the area since it will be getting a lot of wear and tear every time you open and close your zipper. A Bartack is a zigzag stitch with a small length and width. On my machine, I set the length to 0.5 and the width to 2.5. Once your Bartack is in place, this is what it should look like from both the front side and the back side. Okay, your zipper fly is done, and I highly recommend that you take a moment to celebrate before you continue on with your project, because in my opinion, zipper flies are the most difficult thing to do on a pair of pants. Give yourself a pat on the back, maybe go grab a tea or something to treat yourself. You did a great job. Now let's move on. Next, you're going to prepare the pleats by folding the notches on the front pant pieces so that they match each other. The pleats are intended to fold inward towards the center front fly. Then you're going to pin them in place and sew them down close to the edge of the pant. Please note that I don't recommend pressing the pleats. Different fabrics like to lay differently on the body, so the result will likely be better if you let the fabric fall naturally as you wear them. Now we're going to prepare the pocket facings. Remember that this step is not necessary if your pocket bag fabric is the same as your pant fabric. If that's the case, go ahead and skip to attaching the pocket bag to the front pant. In order to prepare the pocket facings, you'll press the inner diagonal edge by 3/8 of an inch. Then you'll pin the facings to their respective portion of the pocket bag with the pressed edge folded under. Edge stitch both of the facing pieces to the pocket bag to secure them in place. Once both of the pocket bags are prepared, it's time to attach them to the front pant. With right sides facing each other, align the diagonal edge of the pocket bag to the diagonal edge of the front pant. Pin in place and sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Next, you'll take your work over to your ironing board and press the seam allowance of the pocket bag and the front pant towards the pocket bag. Understitch the seam allowance in place. This will help ensure that the pocket stays where it belongs when you're wearing the trousers. Now you're going to French seam the bottom edge of the pocket bag. To do so, fold the pocket bag in half so that the wrong sides are facing each other. Sew a straight stitch on only the bottom edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then you'll fold the pocket bag so that the raw edge is on the inside and the right sides are facing each other. Press the seam allowance in place and sew a straight stitch with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. This will fully enclose the raw edge so that it's nice and clean. Now you're going to align the edges of the pocket bag with the edges of the front pant. Press the pocket bag in place and edge stitch it to the front pant at the top edge and side edge. The front pant pieces are fully prepared, and now it's time to work on the back pant pieces. Start by folding the darts on the back pant with right sides together. I like to use a pin to mark the end of the dart. Then you'll sew a straight stitch from the top of the dart to the bottom. My favorite trick when sewing darts is to use a straight edge to follow when stitching. I use this little ruler as a guide. When you get to the end of the dart, be sure not to backstitch. Instead, you'll want to tie off the dart by hand and snip off the excess. Next, you're going to press the darts towards the center back of the pants. If you have a pressing ham, I highly recommend using it so that the darts offer a flattering shape rather than a pointy one. I also recommend using steam when pressing the end of the dart because I find that it helps with the finish. Once you've prepared both darts, you're going to place both of the back pant pieces on top of one another with right sides facing each other. Then you're going to pin them together and sew the rise with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once the back pant pieces are sewn together, you'll press the seam allowance of the rise towards the right back pant leg. At this point, both of your front and back pant pieces are almost ready to be attached. First, you're going to finish the side seams and inseams of the front and back pant legs. When finishing the inseams of the front pant leg, you will also simultaneously be finishing the outer edge of the pocket bags. Next, you'll lay your front and back pant pieces on top of each other with right sides facing each other. Then you'll pin both of the side seams together, being sure to match up all of the notches. You'll also pin the inseams together, again matching all of the notches. Once those are prepared, it's time to sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. After all of those seams are sewn, they will all be pressed open. If you're using a heavyweight fabric, you might consider pressing the side seams to the back pant until you reach the bottom of the pocket, and then pressing the seam allowance open. If you choose to do this, you may also want to top stitch the side seam down until the bottom of the pocket, just like you'd see on a pair of jeans. Okay, so now that all of the panels are assembled and the seams are pressed open, it is a really, really good time to try on your trousers and make sure that they're fitting the way that you want them to. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so the trousers are on and I'm already so excited about them. They feel so nice and this color is awesome. But anyways, we are testing for fit right now. So one thing that you're gonna wanna keep in mind when putting these pants on at this stage is that the waistband isn't attached yet, and the waistband is a curved waistband. What that means is that it's designed to have a bigger bottom portion and a smaller top portion. So even if the pants are like a little bit big right now, like mine are a little bit big right now, once the waistband's attached, it's gonna be a lot more snug. That's one of the beauties of a curved waistband and why I actually like it so much. It basically gives you more comfort around the tummy area, so not everything is so tight, but then there's also no waistband gaping when you sit down because at the tallest portion of the waistband, it fits really nicely. With that being said, if you do decide that you want to take in the trousers, you can do one of two things. So first you'll decide how much fabric you want to take out, and then you're going to distribute that fabric equally between either the back darts or the front pleats. Essentially, if there's a pretty big amount that you want to take out, I'd recommend putting it into the pleats. And if there's a pretty small amount that you want to take out, I'd recommend putting it into the darts. If you distribute too much into those back darts, it's gonna cause some fit issues. And if you choose to take out fabric in somewhere like the center back seam or the side seams, you run the risk of changing the way that it curves around your body, in which case it might not fit around the bum properly or it might not fit around the hips properly. So I really don't recommend taking out fabric from those areas. Now, I've already made these trousers a handful of times, and even though there's a little bit of gaping in the waist at this moment, I know that that's going to be fixed once I put the waistband on. So I'm going to go ahead and attach the waistband next. In order to attach the waistband, we'll first need to prepare the belt loops. I'm adding a double belt loop detail, so that's why I have 2 strips cut out. First, you're going to finish one raw edge of the belt loop strip. Then you're going to iron the belt loop into thirds so that the raw edge is fully encased by the serged edge. That way, your belt loops won't fray when you wash and wear your finished trousers. Once pressed, top stitch 2 parallel rows through all of the layers. Then cut the strip into equal 3.5-inch pieces. There are lines on the pattern piece to follow, but you can also just measure 3.5 inches if you'd prefer. Next, you're going to pin your belt loops in place. Make sure that they are face down so that the right sides of the garment are facing the right sides of the belt loops. Place one belt loop in line with each front pleat closest to the zipper on both the right front pant and the left front pant. Then place one in line with the center back seam and one on each side of the back pant, measuring 1.5 inches away from the side seam. Sew them in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now it's time to attach the waistband. With right sides together, pin one waistband piece to the edge of the garment, sandwiching the belt loops. There are 3 notches on the waistband, which indicate the 2 side seams and the center back seam. Be sure to align all of the notches properly, and then sew the waistband down with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then bring your work over to your ironing station and press the seam allowance up into the waistband. The next step is to align all of the belt loops with the top of the waistband and edge stitch them in place. However, if you're using a heavyweight fabric like denim, you may prefer to top stitch the belt loops down once the waistband is finished, just like you'd find on a pair of jeans. Once all of the belt loops are in place, take your second waistband piece and pin it on top of the first waistband piece, with the right sides together. Be sure to match up all of the notches and sandwich the belt loops. Then you'll sew only the top edges of the waistband together with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once they're attached, take your work over to your ironing board and press the seam allowance and the top of the belt loops towards the inner waistband piece. Edge stitch them in place. This will help keep the inner waistband piece from peeking out when wearing the trousers. Next, fold over the edge of the waistband so that the right sides are facing each other. Then sew the edges of the waistband together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I like to use a ruler as a guide for this step to make sure that I'm sewing a straight edge from the fly all the way up to the top of the waistband. Do this to both sides of the waistband and then bring your work back to your ironing station. Press the bottom edge of the waistband up a little less than 3/8 of an inch. Then fold the waistband right sides out and press it all in place. The next step takes a lot of precision. You'll notice that I pinned the waistband from the back side. This is to ensure that the waistband stays where I want it to when I pin it from the front side. When doing this step, I highly recommend pinning heavily from the front side of the waistband in a vertical direction, rather than pinning horizontally. Also, make sure that there are no leftover pins on the inside of the garment. Once thoroughly pinned, stitch in the ditch between the pants and the waistband. The goal is for the stitching to be visible from the outside, but to stitch down the inner waistband piece all the way around. You'll also want to move the belt loops out of the way and be really careful not to accidentally stitch them down. Stitching in the ditch does take practice, and I do recommend going super slow because it's very easy to mess up. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's like hard, but it does take time and patience. If you don't get it right on the first try, do not worry, it's okay, it's normal. You can always go back and unpick and do it again. Just be sure to take your time. You'll notice that I'm getting super up close and personal with these stitches because I want to make sure that I'm doing it accurately. When the waistband is done, it should be nice and clean on both the outside and the inside. Now it's time to add the closure of your choice. I'll be using a hook and eye metal clasp and omitting the interior button. However, if you'd like to add an interior button, all of that information is detailed in the instructions. For this closure option, place the eye on the left front waistband in line with the zipper and hand sew it in place. Then close the zipper to figure out where you'd like to place the hook. It will likely be in line with the zipper as well. Once you have your desired placement, hand sew it in place through only the inner waistband piece. When doing this, I consistently check the outside of the garment to make sure that my stitching is not visible. Alright you guys, now is a great time to try on your trousers and make sure that everything is fitting the way that you want it to. I am deciding to omit the interior buttons on these trousers, but it's super easy to do and all of the information is in the instructions. Now the reason that I recommend trying on the trousers again at this point is because if you don't line up either the button and the buttonhole or the hook and the clasp correctly, then you're gonna see some pulling around the zipper area. You basically just want to take a look at this space right here and make sure that there's no visible tugging on the fabric. If you find that there's any tugging, I recommend changing the placement of the hook or of the button. Another thing that you're going to want to check on is the length. The trousers are designed for someone that's 5 foot 5 inches, so if you're not 5'5", you might have to adjust the length accordingly. Also, everyone's proportions are just different, so even if you are 5'5", I highly recommend trying these on and making sure that you're hemming them to the length that you want them to be at. They are designed to kiss the floor, but if that's not your personal preference, that's totally okay and you can absolutely change it. I've also designed the hem to be 2 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and hem them now. If you're using fabric that frays a lot like mine is, I recommend serging around the edge just so that it's easier for you to turn up. The raw edge is going to be turned up inside of the cuff, so it's not super necessary, but I just find that it can be easier to work with fabric when the raw edge is serged. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we're going to press it. Fold the bottom edge of the pant under by 3/8 of an inch and press it in place. Then fold it up another 2 inches and press that in place. Now all that's left to do is stitch the cuff in place and celebrate because your tapioca trousers are officially finished. I hope you love your new trousers and found this tutorial helpful. My goal is to make sewing clothes more accessible to anyone that's interested in it, so it was really important to me to have detailed instructions, illustrations, and a tutorial for my first ever sewing pattern. I'm so thankful that you chose to support me by making these trousers, and I really hope you enjoyed the process. Thank you again for following along, and I hope to see you in the next one.